what is success to you? You know, is it a mansion? Is it a G-Wagon? Is it like whatever it is? It's not like Africa, we don't have resources. Like right now, I hang out in Kilimani and I see more Range Rovers than you ever see in Oklahoma City.
Welcome to another episode of Life Journeys. My name is Georgina Njogu. Today, I'm going to be talking to a gentleman who is going to be sharing his journey with us. But before we begin, thank you so much, Gracia Gardens in Kilimani along Dennis Street for this lovely location. Karibu sana, Charles.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing
You're
great.
well?
It's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. So let's start your journey from you telling us who is Charles.
It's a broad question. But Charles Thuo, background, so from Gong, but Ushagoni Moranga, but grew up in Gong. I think I went to Gong when I was in class 3. So you can say my whole life has been in Gong. Taimia El Nino, so I'm dating myself. But that's when I was in class 3, grew up in Gong. That's also where I went to high school, Ololesa. And then for college, I went to Kenyatta University, but I only did 1 semester. And then I got an opportunity to go to school in the U.S.
That's in 2010.
Yes, 2010. 2010 is when I left.
What motivated your move to the U.S.?
A lot of that is maybe curiosity, or maybe guess looking for better opportunities. And also, it's basically how we brought up. We brought up admiring the West. You know, you want to go to America and all that kind of stuff. So it was, I think it was an opportunity to explore.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think even when I left Kenya, I hadn't even been to Mombasa yet, and it's just down the street. But then, so it was an interesting experience. Yes.
Okay, so for you to move to the US, there are all these processes.
Yes.
How did you maneuver the processes? How did you show that during your visa application that, hey, I can afford the school fees?
Yeah. So now to go back a little further, so I had an uncle. I have an uncle. He's based in Durban, South Africa. But most people that go or they immigrate to South Africa, they usually go to Botswana first. And they'll go to Botswana for maybe 2 to 3 years before they jump the fence into South Africa. So when my uncle was over there, he had a friend. And that friend ended up going to Oklahoma. So whenever he had the idea, it was basically looking the best way, or I think the easiest way to go, I think it still is to go through a student. Because like a lot of American schools, they really like international students because whenever you're an international student, I think your tuition is almost 3 times more than the locals. So they're really great. And that's why you see a lot of Chinese kids or Middle Eastern kids, they go to school over there. But then now, ideally how you're supposed to go is either you have a scholarship or you have rich parents, you know, because again, it's expensive. But there's always a way. So whenever we were applying, it really helps whenever you go to the embassy to already have an admission letter from a school. And whenever you get admitted, they give you what you call an I-20. I mean, that was like almost 14 years ago, so I don't know if the process is still the same. But now, like, the easiest way to apply is you apply for a school, and then when you get admitted, then you can go to the embassy to get a visa. So the gentleman, the one that was in Oklahoma, so he was the one helping me apply for school. Because I was back in the day, like, you didn't have the convenience of WhatsApp, you know, so it was mostly through emails.
Yeah.
So I would send him like my high school results, and then he'll go apply, and then they'll come back, oh, your birth certificate and all that. But we got the admission, and then like one of the key requirements to get admitted is that you have to show financial proof that you can afford to pay for your school.
Yeah.
And that it's either you have a scholarship or you have to show a bank statement. But, you know, a thing that we used to use is the bank statement doesn't necessarily have to be yours.
Yeah.
So sisi ni wale watu wa kuomba bank statement. So I had a family friend. So we had a family friend. He was working Safaricom. He was an engineer at Safaricom at the time, so he was doing all right. And then him and his three friends, they had like a joint account, and they were pooling resources so they can invest in a real estate and all that. And I remember, so he was the gentleman that that I approached, and I was like, hey, you know, can I borrow your bank statement? And it was interesting because he had been to the U.S. for college himself, so he kind of understood. And I remember the advice that he was giving me was kind of like, no, Charles, you know, you should probably not go there for your bachelor's. You should at least, because you're already a KU, like finish your bachelor's, and then maybe if you still want to go, you can go to the US for a master's. You know, a master's is usually a year and a half to 2 years. And then now, if you already have a bachelor's, you have more flexibility because you can work. Hey, but ukiwa hapo unajua uwezi sikia, like, and I'm like, no, I gotta go, you know. So, but you know, he gave us his bank statement, and that's the ones that we used to show proof. So, got the admission letter from a campus in Oklahoma. It's a small college, Oklahoma State. So some of these major colleges, they have like the main campus, and they also have like satellite ones. And so, and those ones, they usually do like associates. For you to get a bachelor's, then you have to go to the main campus. But you can, I think like Nairobi University have some satellite campuses.
Yeah.
So it was one of those. And so I got the admission letter, and then that's when we started the process of, you know, getting a visa. And that's a whole different story, because like, it's interesting because you can imagine there's a lot of people that want to go to the US for various reasons. And I remember, so from my background, no one had ever been to the US in my entire family. So we didn't kind of like have that process, like, hey, how does this work? So it was more like figuring it out. And I remember, so I had a cousin, and she has like one of those, you know, whenever you go to in CBD and you need some documents, or you need to register your vehicle, or you need to do a lot of, you know, cyber, and they also do documents and all. So she does that. And so she was kind of like the one helping me do the application, you know, submitting those documents and whatnot. And then, so we had to go to the interview now. So we got the interview. And I remember going to the first interviews, and it was like, you gotta be there like at 5 in the morning, you know, because there's all these people waiting. I don't understand why, because they do have appointments. I don't know if they do. I think they did have appointment, because you know, like your appointment is at 9, but so for some reason you have to show up there like at 5 in the morning. I never understood that. So I went there the first time. Nikarudishwa ati my passport photo wasn't, I guess, up to spec.
Yes.
You know, it has to be like 2 centimeters or whatever. And they're like, oh, there's this place in Nairobi where you can go, and they take your picture. So they turned me back and say, come back next week. But the good thing about whenever you're sent back is you still a chance, because they haven't denied it. So I went the week after, you know, the passport was good. And then now they looked at, oh, hauna service. So there's like an insurance that students pay. It's called a service fee. I think at the time it was about $150. And then you have to pay through Western Union. So all these payment gateways, you know, I don't even think M-Pesa was around. I didn't even think it was around. So ilikuwa Western Union. So called Western Union or MoneyGram. And then you have to go pay, and then it gets processed, and now you can go back. So I got sent again. So we paid that, and then I went back the third time. The third time, wakasema, so they looked at the KCSE. Kasema, hey, like your results are too good. So where are you trying to go? So we need to verify this. And how you verify, so you have to go to NEC, the building, and they have to send certified copies through a courier to the embassy. And then that's another cost, because the courier, I think, I don't know how much they charge for them to drive. So ilikuwa, siju kuda ilikuwa natumia bodabodas. And then, so they went. So that was the third time. And then I went the fourth time now. And that's when kind of like, so we already had everything together, all your documents, you know, you got to get the documents like in a certain order and all that. And then it was crazy. Like when I went to the interview, I was like the third person in line. And the 2 people in front of me got denied. So now I'm like, oh shit, you know. And then when I got there, the guy, but it was fascinating because I've been there a couple times. So he was like, hey, so why do you want to go to the U.S.? I mean, you're already in college here. And then it was like, when I was admitted, so I was admitted to go do civil engineering. I said, oh, unajua barabara ni mbaya Kenya, so unataka kwenda kusoma tujue kutengeneza barabara, ndio kuja tengeneze barabara. And then like, but it was great. So my interview was actually only like 3 minutes, you know. So
Yeah.
got the approval, and I'm there. Okay, I think it was on a Tuesday. Just saying, oh, kujia visa Thursday. And then now, that was like sometime in October. You know, I had just started KU. And then a lot of these, we're kind of like going through KU as a plan B. Because, you know, you don't always get a visa.
Yes,
so we're still
for
going to KU, so everything was not set. But then when I got the visa, it was like, oh you got to go, school starts. Because I remember then college, like the first semester in January starts like mid-January. So I had to be there like almost like, so I only had like 2 weeks. So say 2 weeks is kind of like getting everything ready. Hata kwenda, you know, kujaribu kuambia shosho bye, you know, like, hey, I'm going. But the fascinating thing, you don't really think about how far it is because you've never been that far.
Yeah.
You know, unafikiria tu ni kama like kwenda ushago, because that's the furthest I've been. So even like getting on an aircraft, you know, that was the very first time I got on an aircraft. Like,
How was the experience?
it doesn't quite register, you know, and obviously it's a weird experience because whenever you're flying, you're not moving, you know, so it kind of makes the journey even longer because
sure.
you're sitting there, you know, kama uko kwa barabara and the vehicle moves, you know, you feel like unaona kona, umefika kona, so it kind of makes the wait not as long. But whenever, like, I remember from like Nairobi, I think I flew through Dubai. From Nairobi to Dubai, it was like maybe 6 hours. But now from Dubai to like Houston, Texas, it's 14 hours. So that's a long flight. Unajaribu kulala, and then unajua ni watu wa economy, so watuko first class, nikaa kulala kwa basi, you know. Hakuna starehe, so it's exhausting. But then whenever you get there, that's when it hits you. Like, because now you're in a completely different environment. Unajua, there's some familiarity. Unaona kama ukatoka Nairobi uende Kisumu. It's still, the design, the cities, they're all the same.
Yes.
Ukitoka Nairobi uende Nyeri ama Murang'a, there's that familiarity. Even the structures, wezi potea, kuna main road, kuna town, you know. There's a few landmarks, maybe church, sijui gas station. And then obviously people speak your language. But then now you go to a different country, like the culture is different, mannerisms are different. Because like, let's say here, you're so used to atu kapotea, you can easily ask someone for direction. Oh, archives iko wapi? But then when you get there, people are not as communal.
What was your biggest culture shock?
I think the most interesting was the fast pace. You know, over there, everything is high speed. You know, everyone has their own shugulis that they're doing, so there's not, unajua, like in Kenya, after 5, you know, almost everything stops. You know, there's no running around, watu wanaenda nyumbani, and then that's when most people go hang out. But over there, it's a 24-hour economy, you know, so there's no shutting down. And then like, things are different. Even like you say, the food, hakuna ugali. I mean, over now we've been able to, you know, see some African restaurants, but most of the stuff is westernized. Even these local restaurants themselves, you know, is still almost westernized. Like, it's very rare kama kupata food yenye haina nyama, you know, and that's why kind of like now like vegan restaurants are becoming a thing because everything has meat. And then, and then you have to deal with even how people interact with each other. You know, like in Africa, like I said, people have that sense of community. People will say hi to you, and kama huku mtu akusalimia, oh, how is the family, and all that kind of stuff, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Like there is a rapport first before you even ask someone what they want. But over there, it's kind of like everything is fast paced. Hey, what's your name? I need this. You know, and all kinds of stuff. So that was interesting. Yes.
So now you've joined school.
Yes.
Who is paying for your school fees?
So now it was fascinating because I didn't have a scholarship, you know, but I had an aunt. I had an aunt in the UK, and she's actually the one that paid for my flight and helped me pay for my first semester. So I at least had that one semester to kind of understand, you know, get acclimated to the US. But then I had to get work, you know, because again, didn't have a scholarship or, you know, or rich parents. So I remember before you get that student visa, there's these classes that you gotta take. TOEFL, I think it's test of English as a foreign language, and there's also SAT that you have to do. And I think I had a good score in SAT. So whenever I was enrolling in school over there, and they were like, hey, we need a tutor at the learning center. So they have a learning center, you know, for kids that need help.
First job was?
Yeah, so my first job was at the school. So I was tutoring math and science, because zile hesabu wanafanya campus ni zenye huku tunafanya form 2. So, you know, algebra, you know, x plus y.
So you were way ahead.
Yeah, so I was way ahead, like, and that was my first job. And then now whenever you get a job, so as a student, you're allowed to work at the school. They call it work study. So work study, so you can, you know, maybe cover some of your bills, some or whatever. Because again, you should already have a scholarship, so you shouldn't be working.
Yeah.
But at least they understand you still have some expenses. So they allow you to work part-time, like 20 hours a week. And then now whenever you get a job, you can go to the Social Security or the IRS or the KRA of there, and they give you a Social Security card. And that's like your KRA PIN, and that's how you're able to work. But now, since you're a student, you're not authorized to work outside the school. So usually the Social Security card comes with a stamp. I think it reads, can only work under authorization from DHS. So DHS is the Department of Homeland Security. So that's how they keep track of, you know, people who are allowed to work. And then like white collar jobs, they have a system called E-Verify. So before they give you a job, they'll go to E-Verify, put in your social and see if you're authorized to work on it. But some jobs, you know, zenye watu wataki kufanya, most of those they don't check.
Okay.
Like restaurants, warehouses, you know, nyumba za wazee. So now, for you to get social, you have to get a job first. And now, because why do you need a KRAP and you don't have a job?
Yeah.
So now, without a job at the school, that's how I was able to get a social. And then sasa ukipata social, unaenda River Road ya huko. So they just basically edit the stamp. That way, the PIN is valid and everything. So you still pay taxes. But then if the jobs don't care about whether you're verified or not, you can get a job. So my first outside job ilikuwa warehouse ya Coca-Cola. So I guess uko nazita go down.
What are you doing at the warehouse?
So I started warehouse ya ku pick orders. So no, like if you order from Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola sana sana huku Kenya, I think Kenya tu wanafanya Dasani na sijui Novida or whatever. But Coca-Cola actually have very many products. And then you have all these little shops like gas stations. So, you know, we call them convenience stores. So they make orders. So now those orders are prepared at night. So hiyo ndio ilikuwa kazi yetu. So unaenda in the warehouse picking all those orders. Unazieka in a pallet, alafu you wrap it, and then it gets loaded in a truck to deliver in the morning. So that was my first job at the warehouse. Nilikuwa naanza 10 p.m. mpaka 4 in the morning. So that was in the school nilikuwa naanza 3. So ilikuwa naanza 3 p.m. mpaka 9. So that's when learning center ilikuwa inafungwa. And then 9 natoka Coca-Cola naingia 10 mpaka 4. And then 4 ndio unaenda home unalala, and then 8 uko class.
How many hours do you sleep? So there's no rest.
I used to sleep like maybe 3 to 4 hours. Yeah, so like literally you have no life.
And
yeah.
And is the money you're making enough to pay your school fees?
It's just enough to pay for school. So it's basically ukienda US. That's why I say most people when you're in the US, most people ataka at least 5 to 6 years kabla arudi. Because life inakwanga like kusurvive. You pay, and kama uko shule na sasa you're a full-time student and you're also working like 2 or 3 jobs. Like that's all you do.
Will
So
you say,
unatoka.
sorry for interrupting,
No.
yeah?
Yeah.
You say that you didn't have a social life.
Yes.
Is it right to say that it's a lonely world, lonely country? Especially if you're a foreigner.
Yeah. It surely is, especially kama like, you know, there are some people who are lucky that have scholarships. You know, if you have scholarships, then you can just focus on school. Ni kama huku Kenya, kama uko na pesa za help, you know, mzazi, they don't even have to worry, so you can actually go be a student. Like most people wanaenda Nairobi ama KU, they don't have jobs. You just go into school. And then you get to experience, you know, all these activities of being a young person, you know, experiencing life. But whenever you're there, even normal people, even whenever you graduate, the cost of living is very high. So here in Kenya, I mean, yes, Kenya is starting to change a little. Even whenever you're married, both of you have to be working. But maybe like 10 years ago, just only one person needed to work. Now you can afford a nice house, you can afford, you know, like a nanny, take care of your kids. But over there, the cost of living is so high. So most people work. And then that's when you find that like even all this culture, like Thanksgiving, you know, most people Thanksgiving, that's when you see your family. Because that's of almost everyone works. So yeah, it can be isolating, you know, because even whenever you're hanging out with your friends, unless you have the same job and you have the same schedule, you're probably not going to see them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also this notion that there are some people who go to foreign countries, not only the US.
Yes.
They go for 5 years, 10 years, and still come back with nothing.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because again, the cost of living. Unaona pana, there's this concept inaitwa paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Like, and to kind of like give an example. So let's say here, hata kama unakaa maybe Kilimani ama Tatu City, whatever, I think you can get like a studio, I think call it a bed sitter.
Yeah, bed sitter.
You can get a bed sitter for what? Like how much would a bed sitter go for?
In those areas,
yeah,
maybe 40,000.
40,000.
But there are some areas you can get for 8,000.
Yeah, 40,000. That's like $300, right? Nice neighborhood. But if let's say you're in Oklahoma, a comparable in Oklahoma tuseme ni kama kuishi Githurai. That same bed sitter will cost you maybe like 700. Githurai. So the cost of living is very high. And then there's not like a very robust public transport, unless you're living like in New York where you can get on the subway. But most cities, you're not going to have the Hakuna Matatu, you know, the buses, it's not that way. So you're going to need a car. And having a car comes with the various expenses. You know, you got to make the payment, you got to get insurance, you got to get gas. And na hakuna ati mambo ya mboga ama kiosk yenye iko hapo karibu na apartment. Unajua here ukiwa Kenya, you don't need to go anywhere kwenda kununua unga ama whatever. But over there, like there's commercial areas and there's residential areas. So you're not going to see a convenience store at an apartment. So you most likely have to drive everywhere.
Yeah.
And all those costs compound. So you see a lot of people that you have a job, but at the end of the month, whenever you've done all your expenses, you only may be saving 100 or 200. So it's going to take you a while. Yeah.
There's a perception that life in the US is not a bed of roses, as we all assume.
Yes. So it's actually a very interesting dynamic, meaning that there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities, and because the culture in the US, you have the potential to be whatever you want. There's not really limitations. You're your own limitation. There's the systems are there, you know, the freedom is there, so you can basically do whatever you want. But doesn't mean that it's given to you. You have to hustle.
Yeah.
And that's where you see people work really hard, but then again, the opportunities are also there. But now it becomes like there's a cost. There's a cost to it, like, but if you're willing to pay the cost, then you can do it.
What's the cost?
The cost is that part of that, not having a social life, you know, sometimes, you know, sacrificing your health because you don't have like a regular schedule, you're not sleeping enough, and just from that running around, so you're only eating like fast food, you know, hauna time ya kwenda nyumbani kupika ugali na skuma. And then all these things, after a while, it can compound if you're not careful. And that's where you kind of like see health. Health is a really huge concern in the US. You know, you have the highest level of like obesity or diabetes because these fast foods, they're not the healthiest option, but they're convenient. But and then like whenever those guys, whenever they're making this food, it's not for nutrition. They optimize for cost. So you're just gonna get the substandard materials to make your hamburger. And then whenever you're so used to that, you know, running around, not sleeping enough, not taking care of yourself, it can take a toll on you. And that's the cost. But now the hope is what you don't want to getting into is living on autopilot. And you see a lot of people, let's say you have a 9 to 5. You're so used to it. You get into that structure that you have something that you do. And it becomes a rat race where you're just living on autopilot, and then 5 or 6 years down the line, you look back and I'm like, oh shit, what have I done with my life? But then what I would advise is kind of like, and I talk to a lot of people, like I ask, you know, like I'll ask someone, hey, obviously everyone wants to be successful, but what is that? What is success to you? Like, how do you define success? You know, is it a mansion? Is it a G-Wagon? Is it like whatever it is? A lot of people don't think about that. And then that's when you start like, you're working. If you don't know your destination, you never get there. Wewe utakaa tu, you have a job, kila mtu anakupigia makofi, Georgina anaenda kazi kila siku. And then 50 years from now, whenever it's time to retire, then you look at, oh man, I've literally wasted my life. Because but then whenever you're intentional about what you want, then now you can, even if you gotta pay your bills, you're also trying to carve out some time to, you know, pursue your own goals.
Okay. Yeah. Now you have completed college.
Yes.
Is it college? What have you graduated with?
So so when I went to OSU, I got admitted for civil engineering. You know, when you're early in the school, you don't really know what you're doing. You know, like if you're in Kenya, Kenya tells you what you're going to school for. You know, Nairobi or Kenyatta, they will tell you, hey, we're going to admit you to do this. So that's already fixed. But in the US, you have this flexibility that you can do whatever you want. So didn't like civil, but I knew I wanted to do some engineering on some level. So I ended up doing general engineering because I wasn't really sure. So and so I graduated with an associate. That was like in 2013. But then after that, needed to figure out, okay, how do I survive here? Because again, school is very expensive. And then so that's when so I got an opportunity to join the army. It's a whole different story. And then when I joined the army, that's how I became a citizen.
Immediately after graduating?
So when I finished my associates. So that's when I went and enlisted in the army. So there's a prior process for that because you had to get a green card and you had to have been in the country like for consecutive like 2 years before you join. And then but whenever you join and you have a green card and you join the military, you actually get your citizenship after the basic training. The basic training for the army was, I think it's like 10 weeks. So after the 10 weeks, the day before graduation, that's when you get naturalized.
Okay.
And then now, whenever you become a citizen, things are easier. Because now, so I was able to go back to school. But then now, I'm not an international student anymore. Now I was paying as a regular person. And then, so when I went back to school, so I decided to do aerospace. So I did aerospace engineering.
After the military, that's when you
After the military,
You're skipping the military part. Did you get deployed?
Yeah, so I actually did.
And what was your role in the military?
So in the military, so I was, I started out at what you call chemical equipment repair. The classification, it's called 91 Juliet. So doing with air conditioning, filtration, you know, anything chemical. But then transition, so I changed my MOS when I was going through school. So when I went back to school, so there's also these, they have these programs that you can do in college. and it's called like a ROTC, so Reserve Officer Training something. And then so you do what you call military science. So it's like a minor, you know, where you have a major and you have a minor. So I did a minor on military science. So whenever I graduated college, I also commissioned as an officer. And then when I commissioned, so I reclassified my job and I became a combat engineer. So combat engineer, it's more like making ways. So let's say if we're like advancing and there's like a building that we gotta get into and there's not a door, so I can make you a door, you know. So that was kind of like what I was doing. I had one deployment in Afghanistan, you know, before everything went crazy. So I was there in 2018. So
How's the experience?
I was in country for 6 months. It's a it's an experience. It's an experience. You get to see a different part of humanity. You know, it's very fascinating what people are capable of. And what's even more fascinating, whenever you hear about what's happening, like right now, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Ukraine, you might think it's like a whole world away. And then you only find out, oh, like, oh man, it's only a 6-hour flight. It's only an 8-hour flight. And then it brings it into perspective. And then whenever you get there, you know, even people understand like media and PR, you're from a PR background. There's a difference between the reality and what actually people perceive.
For sure.
So now whenever you're in the ground, that's when you kind of like get to understand like, okay, this is what really the fight is about. And it really changes your perspective. But it also, it's great to get that exposure. You know, I've had a lot of experiences. You know, I went to so many different countries like, you know, China, Ireland, Kuwait, you know, all these different countries, whether it's like training or interacting with them. So that exposure, you know, it's really helpful. Yes.
So now you've left the military.
Yes.
You've gone to aerospace engineering.
Yes. So so I was doing so my first job. So I was working with Cessna. Cessna, these guys are the ones that make executive jets. So when I was there, Wichita, so that was in the Wichita, Kansas plant. And they were working on a new program called the Latitude program. So these are the 6 to 8 passenger jets. And you know, whenever you're buying a jet, if it's a new jet, they're all custom. You can't go to a showroom. It's not like a car. So basically how it works is some rich guy wants a private jet. And then they'll come and they'll talk to the sales guy. They'll say what they want, or I want a couch, I want a bed, whatever it is. And then the sales, they'll talk to the liaison engineer and they'll take that sales into design requirements. And then that will go to the design guys and they will design the mock-ups and everything. And then I was doing structural analysis. So it was our job to take those design and you convert them into models, like computer models. Like you call the finite element. That way you can analyze it, making sure that it's not going to break whenever it's flying. So I did that for about a year and a half. And then I moved back to Oklahoma and I joined Boeing. So Boeing, I was doing, I was on the defense side. You know, Boeing, there's BCA, the commercial, they make the 747. But I was on the defense side, so these military aircrafts. So I was doing payload design, you know, equipment, modification. So when I was at Boeing, Boeing has a contract for NATO. Most of those NATO aircraft are Boeing aircrafts. So whenever we sell it to them, we also get the contract for maintenance and modifications.
Yeah.
So when I was at Boeing, Boeing was actually only paying me for like office work, like meetings, but my paycheck was actually getting paid by NATO. And then when I was I was at Boeing for about three to 4 years, and then that's when I got into logistics as a side hustle. Because you know, I would say, and I think it's very common for everyone. Whenever you're in the U.S. and you have family back home, you know, you have a lot of responsibilities. You know, taking kids to school, like hospital bills. You know, I think I get a request to join a WhatsApp fundraiser like every other week, but which is, you know, it's understandable.
Yeah.
But then, so kind of like, we trying to find some side hustle. Unajua, mi ni Mkikuyu, you know, lazima utafute side hustles. And so I knew something about logistics, so got into logistics as a side hustle. And then like kind of fell in love with it. So how we started in logistics, so I had this crazy idea, because when I was at Boeing, most people work 8-hour days. So you work 5 days, that's 40 hours, that's full time. But I was working 10-hour days, so I only worked Monday through Thursday. So I had a 3-day weekend every
Friday,
single time,
Saturday,
Friday,
Sunday.
Saturday, Sunday. So I had a lot of, you know, free time over the weekend. And then, so I had this crazy idea. I said, hey, I can go learn how to drive a truck, and I can be driving trucks over the weekend. But then, whenever you get the license, so straight out of school, yes, you can drive, you can park, but you can't drive through like a major city like Nairobi. Unaona kaa kwenda kudrive Nairobi na traffic na all these matatu guys. So these companies are not gonna hire you part-time. So you gotta have like a year of experience. Or you have to go full-time. And then they pair you with a trainer for maybe 2 to 3 weeks until you're comfortable to go on your own. But then now, because I had my job at Boeing, obviously I couldn't do either one.
Yeah.
So we tried for about like 4 months. After the first year, I was like, you know, I just have my own company. So, and that's speaking to the opportunities that you can be able to do. There's so many opportunities. So what we did, so I just bought a truck. So I bought a truck, and I was hiring a driver. And then a lot of that was like learning because I hadn't done logistics, you know, let's try it out. And we tried a few different things. I started doing like delivery trucks. You know, we had this contract where we were delivering medicine. You know, all these pharmacies and hospitals, all those come from like a warehouse. And we just get like a lane, like let's say 10 pharmacies, and you drive that with your van and deliver every single day. But then I got into doing actual freight, like general freight. So we bought a truck, and I was hiring a driver. And an interesting thing what people don't know about logistics, it got to a point where I was paying my driver more in a week than I was getting paid at Boeing as an engineer.
In a month or in a week, yours.
So over there, whenever you have a full-time job, most of the time you get paid every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So my driver was making more in a week than I was getting paid in 2 weeks as an engineer. And he was like, wait a minute, like what's happening here? Because I remember at the time, I think I was getting paid like after taxes and even after, you know, ametoa taxes out. I think I was getting paid like 1,300 every 2 weeks. But my driver, I was paying him like 1,500 a week.
That's a lot.
So yeah, it is a lot. And I like over there, truck drivers, even here, people in logistics, these guys make more money than doctors. So so whenever you got into that, and logistics, there's some very few nuances. Like if you're doing in logistics, you don't make a lot of money doing local stuff. You know, so you have to do long distance. Long distance means you're not going to be home every night. You know, kama kutoka, let's say kutoka Mombasa kwenda Kampala, it takes anywhere from 4 to 5 days. So 4 to 5 days you're not home. And then it's going to take you another 3 days to come back.
Yeah.
So ideally, a driver, you're going to be out for at least a week. You know, most drivers don't like that. And so the retention is not that great. But then whenever you got to that point, you know, and then sazingine drivers, it's a lot of pain dealing with drivers. Oh, sijui, I got a flat. Oh, sijui nini. So you like sitting in the office getting a call, gari mepata flat. And I'm like, fix it, you know, and then to my bill. But then after that, so did it for like another 4 months, you know, juesi kubatisha. And then that's when I decided to do a career switch. So I went from Boeing to actually being a truck driver.
Just like that.
Just like that. Because like, so I try to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
Because like, why am I even going to work? You know, it's to pay bills. Na, you know, pesa ijaandiko kwenye imetoka. So at the end of the day, so I was looking at it like, okay, at Boeing, obviously it's a great job. Boeing is one of the biggest aerospace companies in the world. But why would I work for 2 weeks and I can do the same amount of money in 3 days? And so to me, it was a really easy choice.
What did people say about that? Maybe your family?
Oh man,
Because I can imagine.
I think my dad had depression for like 2 weeks. You know, you know, kijana wetu amepotea. You know, like what happened? Hiyo ni kazi ya watu wajasoma. So you get all that because it's not a usual career path. You know, and growing up in Africa, there's that element of prestige. Whenever you go to school, you want to be the lawyer, engineer, doctor. And then watu wanasikia umetoka what everyone would dream of, kwenda kuendesha lorry, right?
Yeah.
But then they almost had an intervention, you know, like, what's happening? Like, Charles, like, I thought you were ambitious. Yeah, is everything okay? But then you kind of like, hey, what's more ambitious than starting your own company? But they came around. They came around because... so when I went full-time, that was in 2020.
That's when Apex Loads was born?
Yeah, so, no, that was before. When I went full-time.
Okay.
That's when I went full-time, and now I started, that was like in April of 2020. That was like during COVID. So COVID had just started.
Everything is shutting down, then you're resigning your job.
Yeah, so it was, but then in April, no one really know how COVID was going to go because the shutdown, they started happening like towards the end of the year.
Not in March.
But March, that's when people had started.
Yeah.
And then that's when people had started switching to working at home, remote. But logistics was still happening because people gotta eat. You know, medicine needs to, especially medicine, masks, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. People had to, you know, logistics had to happen.
So by then you were making big buck.
Yeah, like it was, I would say, you know, I'll be lying to say, oh, I looked at, I did the research, and I'll be lying. But it turned out to be one of the best years for logistics.
Okay.
And then that's whenever we got into logistics in the US, starting learning the systems about how logistics happen. Like one interesting about logistics, it's usually done by small companies. Even in the US, 70% of trucking companies only have one truck. 70%. Here in Africa, you're talking about almost 80 to 90%. But then now it becomes a situation whereby you as a transporter with your one truck, you don't have the capacity. So if you go to Unilever is not going to work with you because you don't have the capacity. So now you end up relying on brokers and freight forwarders because a broker is the one that is going to go aggregate that capacity for Unilever. But then now in the US, so we have systems about how can let's say Georgina is a broker. How do I connect to her? You know, so we have systems for that. But now whenever you come to Kenya, they connect through WhatsApp groups. So you're going to find like a typical broker or transporter have like 5 to 7 WhatsApp groups. And then now whenever we started comparing like, hey, how people do this in the US and how people do this in Africa, that's when you identify like Africa is generously, maybe more, but almost 30 years behind whenever it comes to systems. And that's basically how Apex Load was born.
Your company is a startup, right?
Yes.
There are so many startups in Africa and Kenya. I'll talk about Kenya because I only know about Kenya.
Okay.
There's so many startups in Kenya that eventually end up failing. Maybe after 2 years they shut down.
Yes.
Most of them say it's the economic pressure. But what really happens? Where do we go wrong? So
obviously economic
factors.
You know, factors are a factor, you know, because like as what a startup is, what basically how I define a startup is that you're trying to prove that you're worth being a company.
Yeah.
So a startup is an experiment. But what I think a lot of people fail to do is something what you call market validation or customer discovery. Yes, you might have a great idea, but you have to first of all validate that that's a big enough problem. You know, because you're not gonna build like a $1 billion company only serving 10 people. That will never happen. And you know, one thing that people, if you're an entrepreneur, one thing that you need to learn very early, it doesn't matter how much you love your product. It doesn't matter how much you love your solution. You're not the customer. So the very first thing that I would kind of like encourage, and I see what a lot of people fail to do, is that validation. Like this problem that I'm trying to solve. Because I think most successful companies are companies solving a problem. Like look at M-Pesa, they were solving a problem. Look at Equity Bank, they're focusing on people who normal banks will not bank, but now they're a huge bank. You know, simply solving that problem. But before you go build a bank or go build it, you have to validate that there is enough people that want your solution.
Yeah.
And that's where like customer discovery comes into place. Like let's say you have a problem. Let's say you're selling diapers to mothers. You have to find mothers. How many of these mothers are there that, you know, kind of like have a good size of your market? And I can say, like in Kenya, there's probably 10 million young mothers that have kids in diapers, you know, maybe from 0 to 2 years, maybe. And then now you got to talk to a few of these mothers and say, how do you take care of kid right now? So it's not like they don't have, it's not like watoto just go to the bathroom on themselves. They have a way. So then you got to figure out like whatever, how are they solving that solution right now? And does it work for them? You know, what are some of the challenges? Because if the solution they have already works, why would they switch to yours? And I think that's a little big problem that a lot of people discount. So that's when you start seeing a lot of people, they're going to build this cool platform because there's a lot of smart kids here. And they're going to build these cool systems. But are you building it because you watched Netflix and you saw that New York has a problem like that? Because that doesn't exist in Kenya. You know, like, so the very first basic thing is validating that people actually have the problem that you're trying to solve for. Because you don't want to build a solution and then go looking for a problem. You know, like, hey, I have this, can you go buy it? You're doing it backwards. The first thing is to, first of all, find a big enough problem. Because, you know, you talk to people. If I talk, people confuse venting. Venting is a problem because there's something that you complain about. But if you're not actively solving it, that is not a problem. And you're not going to pay money for it. Right? So even whenever you're talking to customers, they have to be spending money on it. That's how you know it's a problem.
Okay. So I think earlier on you had explained the problem that Apex is trying to solve, right?
Yes.
The being a connector between.
Yeah, so what we basically do is so we're a solution in logistics, but we don't offer logistics services. We basically trying to build an ecosystem. And a really good example is to say look at YouTube, where YouTube is. So YouTube is a platform for video content creation. So let's say if you're a content creator, the only thing you need is a camera and your creativity. You can tell jokes, you can dance or do skits or whatever. And then you just got to post that on YouTube. And then YouTube gives you the platform to connect you to an audience. You might also find like some Kenyan content creators. They may have a huge audience in Brazil. And you're like, how does that even happen? Simply because of YouTube. So YouTube gives you that infrastructure. You don't have to build your own website. You don't have to do a lot of marketing. You just got to be creative and you just got to be consistent. So whenever you look at logistics, there's obviously all these startups that have come to trying to figure out logistics, you know, in Africa. Even in Kenya, we can talk about Sandy, Amitruck, you know, Lorry Systems, Kobo 360. All these guys have trying to come and solve the problem. But obviously, it's my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think the biggest problem is they're trying to fix a symptom. You know, so because how I look at logistics in Africa, it has 3 main challenges. So first of all, these guys cannot find each other. There's a lot of freight forwarders, there's a lot of transporters, but they don't have a platform of finding each other. That's why they're joining 10 to 7 WhatsApp groups. Then now these logistics startups will come and build a website. That way it's easier to find them. But now you're using that challenge as a competitive advantage. The traditional brokers don't have a website, but you have one and you have some money to do marketing. So people you're easier to find. But you're not solving the underlying issue. You know, another problem becomes in logistics in Africa, there's no regulation. So now let's say I'm trying to work with you and you tell me you're a transporter. For me to verify that, I have to go to like 3 different government organizations just to verify you. And if you have a startup and you raise some money, you can have a compliance department and they can do that. But a regular broker doesn't have the infrastructure to do that. Then another challenge becomes cash flow. So in logistics, it's not like Uber where you pay for the ride after delivery. Most of these things, you gotta get your payment after 30 days, after 65 days. So a lot of transporters cannot afford to do that. But then if you're a logistics startup and you've raised millions of dollars, you can pay your transporter in advance. So now these guys, so they're turning those challenges into competitive advantages because they have the resources, right? But our approach is we're trying to build the foundational infrastructure. That way, if you're a broker uko Mlolongo, obviously you don't have the resources to build your own platform. You don't have the resources to do your KYC or pay drivers in advance. So the same way YouTube empowers content creators, so we're building that ecosystem where you can easily find transporters, you can easily trust them because they're verified, and we're also being able to give you like financial resources so you can be liquid.
Okay.
Yes.
Is this also a way of you reinvesting back in your country?
So, you know, that's a part of, you know, part of why like a lot of people, like why we went to the US, or a lot of people go to all these, you know, foreign universities, is so ideally so you can learn how people do stuff. You know, look at China. China, 30 years ago, China was a third world country, just like Kenya. But then now 30 years later, China is competing with the US.
Yeah.
Why? Because they didn't have to spend money on R&D. They just went to US or Europe, seeing what works, and just went back to China, invested money, and implemented that. And then now you look at, let's say, if you talk to a normal person in like the US, how they grew up. They grew up, let's say they went from no phone, they went to a telegram, they went to a landline, and then went to a cell phone. But for us here, we went from no phone to a smartphone. You know, my very first phone was a smartphone. So now that gives us the advantage to leapfrog. No one right now is gonna get a landline. Like, why would you get a landline? So the advantage of what we have is the problems and the challenges that we have, they've already been solved.
Elsewhere.
There's already been solved elsewhere. All we have to do is borrow it. And, you know, the things are the same. You know, like let's say a broker in Kenya is the same thing as a broker in Texas. They're doing the same thing. A transporter in Kenya is the same thing as a transporter in Europe. But then now the transporter in Europe has better system. They have better infrastructure. And it's so interesting that you can compare like a broker in Kenya. Typical broker, they're only able to do 3 to 5 loads a week because it's going to take them like 2 to 8 hours just to book one load. But if you compare that with a counterpart from maybe a broker in Texas, this guy can do 6 to 14 loads a day.
Yeah.
Because it only takes them a few minutes to do that. So now what we're doing, our mission at Apex Load is we're trying to build that infrastructure. That way, if you're in logistics, you don't have to do this huge investment building your own infrastructure. And then now, if you look at Africa, like Africa is the future. The future is African. Youngest, fastest growing population. Like look at Kenya, the median age is like 19. And then now you can start seeing Africa pushing into promoting more intra-Africa trade. You know, that's why we have the EAC. You know, that's why Africa is pushing for the African Free Continental Trade Area. But then for trade to happen, you need logistics. And for logistics to happen, you need people to trust each other. And for that to happen, you have to have that infrastructure. And that's what we're building at Apex Loads.
Do you regret ever moving to the US? Are there any regrets?
I don't think, you know, I don't really think regret is a good word because like if I could go back, you know,
Would
10
you do
years
it
from
again?
now, I'll probably make the same decision because when I made that decision, it was the best decision at the time. You know, but right now, looking back, I think it was a great opportunity. You know, I've been able to learn so much. You know, I've been able to have a lot of experiences, and I think that makes me better. You know, I think if I wasn't able to figure it out, you know, I'll probably be saying, oh man, I should have just stayed at KU and just finished KU. Nilikuwa na pesa za help and all that kind of stuff. But I think, you know, going back over there, I think it was a great opportunity. And now it's allowing you know, us to come and do some of these cool projects in Africa.
Okay. As we wind up, I want you first of all to address maybe a younger person who, like you, wants to go to the US. What will you tell them?
The very first thing, you know, like, and what other people notice, like, look at myself. You know, I went to the US, but now I'm trying to come back. And you can kind of ask yourself, like, why? Like, because whenever you go over there, you find out all the opportunities are here. You know, if you're trying to solve a business, if you're trying to start a business, this is where to do it. But then now what we got to figure out is a resource part. You know, but I'm not saying you can't go to the US, but I think the future is African. That's why you're starting to see, like, look at all these startups. You know, most of them, they're just like expats, you know, expats that are coming from foreign countries trying to solve our problems. But then who's better to solve our problems than us?
Yeah.
So I think what I would kind of like encourage these young people is to kind of like have a perspective switch. I think we'll be brought up to go to school to get a job, you know, and what I would like to encourage young people is that, like, I think the whole point of going to school is to learn how to solve problems, you know, not to get a job. Whether you're going to be an architecture, you know, how can you do it? That's a skill. You don't need to be employed. Go start your own firm. And there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of problems that we have. And it's not like Africa, we don't have resources. There's a lot of resources. Like right now, I hang out in Kilimani and I see more Range Rovers than you ever see in Oklahoma City. You know, people have resources. And a lot of, they just not that well, you know, open-minded to think about, like, hey, let's invest in Kenya, you know. But then now, if you want an investment, you know, you gotta show the need. You know, like, let's say I'm a young person and I have a cool idea, you know, you gotta do your research, because there's a lot of high net worth individuals and you can tell them, like, hey, there's this problem, you can validate it, because most people understand a problem. You just gotta learn how to package it. Let's say I'm trying to give you a business idea. Most people only look at the front end. Oh, naweza anza boutique, na ukieka boutique utakuwa unauza nywele and you can make this much money. But then again, what is it gonna take? Hiyo nyumba utatoa wapi? Rent ni pesa ngapi? Uko ni you know, that's what you need to do first. And that's why I say, if you go talk to like an investor or any bank, you're gonna need to do a business plan. I mean, right now, a lot of people are switching to pitch decks, but I would also encourage, you know, the whole point ya kufanya business plan is to make sure that you hit all the right, you've answered all the questions, because a business plan itakuuliza, what is the problem you're solving? What is your solution? What's the market size? Why is your solution better than what's already out there? Why are you the best person to do it? How are you gonna make money? How soon until you become profitable? Whenever you go through these processes, that's how you validate your idea. And then, so it's basically encouraging young people. Like Apex Loads, it's built in Africa. All our developers, so we have a team in Kampala and a team in Kenya. It's built here. And, you know, amazing smart people like KU, like our software lead, J Quat, you know, shout out to J Quat. You know, very brilliant people, but wacha tuache history ya kutafuta kazi. You know, solve a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to you, our viewer, thank you so much for your time. Till next time, adios.